January 1944. The airfield at Rechlin, Germany, lies frozen under a heavy blanket of winter mist. The skeletal trees around the perimeter stand silent, their branches weighed down by frost. In the center of the tarmac sits a machine that does not belong there, a captured American P-47 Thunderbolt. Its polished aluminum skin gleams faintly beneath the gray sky, marked now with black German crosses hastily painted over the fading U.S. insignia. A German test pilot, Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, steps toward it, gloved hands tucked into his leather jacket. The cold air bites at his face as he studies the foreign aircraft before him. The plane looks brutish, oversized, nothing like the sleek, angular Messerschmitts he knows so well. Yet something about it commands respect. Ground crewmen circle the fighter, checking the radial engine, noting every unfamiliar. By 1943, the skies over Europe had transformed into a vast and unforgiving battlefield. What had once been dominated by the Luftwaffe's sleek Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s was now slowly slipping away under the weight of American industrial power. The U.S. Army Air Forces were arriving in relentless waves, formations of B-17s and B-24s stretching across the horizon, escorted by fighters that could finally go the distance. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was among the most formidable of them. Heavy, rugged, and armed with 850 caliber machine guns, it was unlike anything the Germans had faced before. Nicknamed the Jug, it wasn't graceful, but it was powerful and deadly. Its massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine could absorb punishment that would tear other fighters apart. In the hands of skilled American pilots, it became both protector and hunter, escorting bombers deep into German airspace and diving low to tear through trains, tanks, and convoys. For the Luftwaffe, 1943 marked a grim turning point. German fuel reserves were thinning. Allied bombing raids struck deeper each week, crippling aircraft production and oil supplies. Even the most experienced pilots were being lost faster than they could be replaced. The once feared Luftwaffe was now stretched thin, defending on multiple fronts, relying on fewer aircraft and scarcer resources. And yet, German innovation didn't stop. Their engineers and tacticians sought every advantage, studying their enemies' machines with obsessive precision. Whenever an Allied plane went down in relatively good condition, it was not simply destroyed, it was claimed, repaired, and examined. These captured aircraft were treasures, offering insights into Allied technology, design philosophy, and combat tactics. Among the most prized of these captures was the P-47 Thunderbolt, a machine that embodied the industrial might and tactical thinking of the United States. The Germans wanted to know, how could such a heavy fighter climb so fast, dive so powerfully, and still return home riddled with bullets? To answer that question, the Luftwaffe's top test pilots would have to fly one themselves. And for that, they turned to their secret testing divisions, special units created to uncover the enemy's technological secrets. The Luftwaffe's testing divisions, known as Erprobungskommandos and Circus Rosarius Circus, were responsible for evaluating captured Allied aircraft. These units operated in strict secrecy, usually from well-guarded airfields like Rechlin and Göttingen. Their mission was simple but vital: understand the enemy's strengths, identify weaknesses, and translate that knowledge into survival on the battlefield. Pilots like Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche and Oberleutnant Gustav Rodel were assigned to these programs, men trusted with the dangerous task of flying unfamiliar aircraft with completely different control systems, flight behaviors, and instrumentation. Their work helped the Luftwaffe anticipate Allied tactics and adjust their own strategies. Accordingly, the P-47 that found its way into German hands had been captured after a forced landing behind enemy lines. In late 1943, An American pilot from the 56th Fighter Group had suffered engine trouble during a bomber escort mission over northern France. Attempting to nurse the damaged Thunderbolt home, he was forced to put it down in a flat field outside Chartres. Before demolition charges could be set to destroy the aircraft, a German patrol reached the site. The pilot was taken prisoner, and the nearly intact P-47 was transported by rail to a Luftwaffe testing facility. There, under German mechanics, the aircraft was meticulously repaired. Its bullet holes were patched, its markings replaced with black crosses, and its instruments carefully translated. To the men who would fly it, it was both an enemy and an opportunity. They approached it with caution and respect, knowing that a single error could be fatal. By early 1944, the Thunderbolt sat ready at Rechlin, fully functional, a living example of American engineering. For the Luftwaffe, it represented more than a machine. It was a key to understanding why the Allies were beginning to dominate the skies. And so, under the gray German winter, the stage was set for one of the most remarkable test flights of the war. When a German pilot would climb into the cockpit of the enemy's most powerful fighter and discover firsthand what made it so formidable. The technical angle when the P-47 Thunderbolt was rolled into the hangar at Rechlin, German engineers approached it like archaeologists uncovering the remains of a giant. The aircraft was enormous by fighter standards. Thick wings, a barrel-like fuselage, and a radial engine that seemed almost too large to fit. Yet every inch of it was functional, deliberate, and purposeful. The engineers quickly realized that this was not a machine built for elegance. It was built for endurance. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, the heart of the Thunderbolt, was unlike anything Germany had mass-produced. Its radial layout eliminated coolant lines and radiators, meaning it could take hits that would cripple a Bf-109 or FW-190. The engine's turbo-supercharger system, mounted far behind the cockpit, used a complex network of ducts to maintain power at high altitude, something that German aircraft struggled to achieve without specialized models. Then there was the armament, 850 caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing, giving the Thunderbolt unmatched firepower in its class. German analysts noted that this configuration provided both redundancy and balance, ensuring consistent lethality even with partial damage. When compared to the FW-190's dual-cannon setup, the P-47's firepower density was staggering. The armor plating around the cockpit, the bullet-resistant windscreen, and the rugged undercarriage told the same story. The Thunderbolt was designed to bring its pilot home, not just to win a fight. The pilot's angle, when Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche climbed into the cockpit for the first time, he felt like he was sitting in a tank with wings. The seat was deep, the canopy narrow, and the instrument panel crowded with unfamiliar gauges labeled in English. But once the engine roared to life, the aircraft's character emerged. Lerche noted in his report that the controls were heavy, especially compared to the light, responsive stick of a Bf-109. Taxiing was difficult due to the high nose, but once airborne, the Thunderbolt's stability was remarkable. Its roll rate was slower, but the aircraft maintained precise control even in high-speed dives, an area where many German fighters became dangerously unstable. The first dive test astonished him. As the altimeter spun downward and the speed climbed past 500 miles per hour, the P-47 held steady, refusing to break apart. The airframe groaned but never lost integrity. German pilots had long relied on dive tactics to disengage from superior enemies, but this aircraft could chase them all the way down. A sobering realization. Lerche described the flight as a contest between brute strength and refinement, and strength won. The P-47 might not outturn a German fighter, but it could outlast one. To the Luftwaffe, that endurance was as intimidating as any weapon. By the time Lerche touched down, the conclusion was clear. The Americans had created a fighter that embodied industrial resilience, a machine that made survival its greatest advantage. The tactical angle. The Luftwaffe's analysis of the P-47 was not left to gather dust in a report. It was immediately circulated to frontline squadrons under tactical memoranda marked Geheim, secret. The key message was simple: never fight the Thunderbolt on its terms. German pilots were instructed to avoid diving pursuits, as the P-47's mass and turbocharged engine gave it an unmatched vertical advantage. Instead, they were told to exploit the Thunderbolt's weaknesses: its slower roll rate, larger turning radius, and heavy control response. The best chance lay in initiating combat from below, then breaking away before the American pilot could react. But these theoretical tactics met harsh realities. The P-47's ability to dive, recover, and climb back to altitude made ambushes dangerous. Its presence above German skies forced the Luftwaffe to shift from offense to defense, conserving fuel and avoiding prolonged engagement. Even German aces admitted privately that fighting the Thunderbolt was like wrestling an armored bear. The test results at Rechlin shaped not just combat doctrine, but morale. For the first time, Luftwaffe command acknowledged that the Americans had achieved something remarkable, not through superior pilots, but through engineering built for mass warfare. The Thunderbolt was less about elegance and more about endurance, and that endurance was winning the air war. The moral angle for the men who flew and studied the captured Thunderbolt. The experience was quietly unsettling. They had been raised in a culture of mechanical perfection and national pride, believing German engineering was the pinnacle of aviation. But in the cold hangars of Rechlin, they were forced to confront a humbling truth. Their enemy's design philosophy was not inferior. It was different, and in many ways, superior for the kind of war being fought. Flying the P-47 blurred the lines between enemy and engineer. Lerche later wrote that he felt a strange connection to the American pilot, who once sat in the same cockpit. Both were aviators, risking their lives in machines built by nations that no longer seemed so different when viewed from the sky. In that realization lay an uncomfortable respect and a warning. War might divide men by flags and ideologies, but the machines they built spoke a universal language of survival, courage, and progress. And soon, those lessons would be tested not in laboratories or airfields, but in the crucible of battle, where the Luftwaffe would discover firsthand that knowledge alone could not turn the tide. The morning air over Rechlin was dense with mist when the P-47 Thunderbolt prepared for its first full evaluation flight. Mechanics tightened the last bolts on the cowling while Hans Werner Lerche stood beside the massive radial engine, helmet under his arm, eyes fixed on the foreign insignia painted over with black German crosses. Around him, the test crew waited in silence. This was not merely another flight. It was a glimpse into the power that was transforming the war above Europe. As Lerche climbed into the cockpit, he immediately felt how alien the machine was. The seat was wide and deep, surrounded by heavy armor plating. The canopy gave only partial visibility forward, and the throttle quadrant felt oversized, designed for gloved American hands. He strapped in, reviewed the English markings one last time, and signaled for ignition. The starter motor whined. Then the Pratt & Whitney R2800 caught fire, with a growling thunder that rolled across the field. The air shook. Even from the cockpit, Lerche could feel the vibration through the metal seat and control column, a raw, pulsing heartbeat of industrial power. It was not refined like the smooth hum of a Daimler-Benz engine. It was primal. As the power climbed, the propeller wash tore at the snow-dusted tarmac. The temperature gauges stabilized. With a final nod to the ground crew, Lerche released the brakes. The P-47 began to roll, slow at first, then faster. The nose lifted reluctantly, heavy, stubborn, until the aircraft pulled free of the ground and surged into the gray sky. Lurcha pushed the throttle to military power. The Thunderbolt responded like a creature unleashed, climbing steadily through the mist, its broad wings cutting through the cold air with mechanical confidence. At 10,000 feet, he leveled out. The controls were firm, requiring strength rather than finesse. The stick resisted his touch, but once set, the aircraft held its line like it was riding on rails. He performed gentle turns, then sharper banks. The P-47 responded sluggishly at first, then with surprising grace for its weight. Then came the test that everyone on the ground awaited. The dive. Lurch pointed the nose downward, throttled back, and let gravity take hold. The speed rose past 400 miles per hour. 450, 480. The cockpit shuddered. The air screamed against the canopy. Yet the Thunderbolt did not falter. The controls stiffened, but they did not lock. The wings held. The airframe absorbed the stress like a hammer striking an anvil. At 500 miles per hour, he eased the stick back. Slowly, steadily, the heavy fighter pulled out of the dive. No flutter, no structural vibration, no sense of losing control. Lurcha exhaled into his oxygen mask, stunned. Few German fighters could survive a dive at that speed without serious risk. Next came the climb test. He opened the throttle, watching the turbo supercharger respond instantly. The aircraft surged upward, the rate of climb slower than a Bf-109, but astonishingly consistent. Even at 25,000 feet, where most engines gasped for air, the Thunderbolt still delivered smooth, unwavering thrust. Lurcha noted the temperature gauges, stable. Oil pressure, solid. The engine, though massive, seemed indifferent to altitude. He tested the guns next, short bursts from the 8 Browning 50 calibers. The recoil barely affected the aircraft's stability. The firepower, he realized, was enough to shred a bomber or cripple a fighter with a single sustained burst. After an hour in the air, Lurch returned to the field. The landing, as expected, was rough. The Thunderbolt descended fast, its heavy frame demanding a firm hand and a long runway. But as the wheels met the ground and the plane rolled to a stop, Lurch knew he had just witnessed something extraordinary. He shut down the engine. The roar faded into silence. Stepping down from the cockpit, he was met by a cluster of engineers holding clipboards, their faces lit with both fascination and disbelief. Lurcha removed his helmet, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said simply, "It flies like a beast, but it flies honestly. It forgives its pilot." That statement, quiet and technical, would carry immense weight in the reports that followed. For the Luftwaffe, it meant that the Americans had mastered something far beyond design elegance. They had built reliability into combat itself, and as the test crew recorded every figure from that flight, Germany's aviation command began to understand that the war in the air was no longer about agility or artistry. It was about endurance, power, and production. The flight of that captured P-47 would soon ripple through every Luftwaffe unit still defending the Reich, changing how German pilots viewed not only their enemy, but the future of air combat itself. The data from Lurch's flights spread quickly through the Luftwaffe's technical offices. His detailed reports, accompanied by performance charts and stress analyses, were circulated among senior staff in Berlin and at the front. To most pilots, it read like a revelation and a warning. The Thunderbolt, they learned, was not the clumsy brute they had imagined. It was a highly engineered machine optimized for a specific kind of war. A long, grinding conflict of endurance, where the ability to survive was worth more than the ability to outturn the enemy. Lurch's notes emphasized several key findings. First, the aircraft's durability. Its radial engine and heavy armor made it almost immune to short bursts of gunfire. Second, its altitude performance. The turbo supercharger allowed it to maintain power where German engines faltered. Third, its psychological design. Everything about the Thunderbolt gave confidence to its pilot. It was a machine that reassured. In the months following the Thunderbolt's evaluation, the Luftwaffe's technical division finalized its internal report. A thick dossier marked streng geheim, top secret. It detailed everything from the P-47's climb rates to its stress tolerances, complete with pilot commentary and mechanical breakdowns. The conclusion was both respectful and grim. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt represents the apex of rugged fighter design, built for endurance and firepower rather than agility. German analysts were stunned by its mechanical philosophy. The Thunderbolt's airframe, overbuilt and reinforced, could absorb punishment that would destroy most fighters. Its engine, a 2,000 horsepower radial with a turbo supercharger, gave it unmatched performance at high altitude. Yet what impressed them most was its forgiving nature. Even with damage, it would still bring its pilot home. These insights forced the Luftwaffe to rethink strategy. Direct engagements with American escort fighters were discouraged. Instead, pilots were urged to strike bombers in coordinated waves and disengage quickly. Reports from frontline units, however, told a harsher truth. The tactics rarely worked. The Thunderbolts and Mustangs dominated the skies, diving out of the sun with crushing speed and climbing back with impunity. Germany tried to respond. Engineers began reinforcing existing designs, experimenting with heavier armor and boosted engines. But by then it was too late. Factories were bombed, fuel was scarce, and the veteran pilots who could adapt such tactics were gone. The Luftwaffe's technological insights came too late to alter the course of the war. By 1944, Allied bombers roamed deep over the Reich, almost unopposed. The skies that once belonged to the Messerschmitts were now ruled by formations of American fighters, Thunderbolts, Mustangs, and Lightnings, sweeping in endless waves. The German High Command still circulated Lurch's report, perhaps as a reminder of what had been learned, and what could never be undone. In the end, the flight of that captured P-47 had offered clarity, not salvation. It showed the Luftwaffe what made its enemies strong, the marriage of technology and mass production. But it arrived in a Germany that no longer had the means to respond. The lessons were precise, brilliant, and tragically useless in a collapsing war machine. The Thunderbolt had revealed the truth not only about American engineering, but about the future of warfare itself. That victory would no longer belong to the best pilot, but to the side that could build 1,000 planes for everyone lost. After the war, when the smoke cleared and the hangars fell silent, both sides began piecing together the puzzle of what they had learned. Allied intelligence recovered the Luftwaffe's test files, including the reports on the captured P-47. What they found was surprising. German evaluations of American aircraft were more thorough and respectful than expected. Engineers from the U.S. Army Air Forces and the British Ministry of Aircraft Production studied these documents closely. The data confirmed what Allied pilots already knew in practice, that durability and power had saved countless lives. But the German technical notes added something more, an understanding of how the enemy had perceived them. It was, in a sense, a mirror, showing how American design had looked through the eyes of its adversaries. The knowledge exchange didn't stop there. Many German engineers, including those once stationed at Rechlin, were later absorbed into Allied research programs under Operation Paperclip. They brought with them not only insights from captured aircraft, but the foundational thinking that would shape the jet age. The lessons of the Thunderbolt: robust structure, reliable engines, high-altitude efficiency would quietly inform the next generation of aircraft, from the F-86 Sabre to the MiG-15. Similarly, American and British engineers acknowledged what they had learned from their own captured German designs, especially the emphasis on aerodynamics, swept wings, and high-speed flight. In a strange twist of fate, The adversaries, who had once tried to outbuild and outfly each other, now shared the same vision of progress. By the 1950s, jet fighters bore the genetic code of both philosophies. The toughness of the Thunderbolt merged with the aerodynamic finesse of the Me-262. The result was a new era, one where reliability and speed coexisted, and the brutal lessons of the 1940s became the foundation of modern air power. For historians, the captured P-47 remains more than a curiosity. It is a symbol of mutual respect born from conflict, proof that even amid destruction, knowledge can survive and evolve. The Germans had once flown the Thunderbolt to understand their enemy. In the end, that flight helped shape the technology that would define peace and the skies beyond war. In the gray stillness of that winter airfield, when a German pilot first gripped the throttle of an American Thunderbolt, history paused for a brief, quiet moment. The flight was more than a test of machinery. It was a collision of worlds, a meeting point between two opposing visions of strength. One born from industrial might and mass production, the other from engineering finesse and precision craftsmanship. As the propeller spun and the engine roared to life, the boundaries between enemy and admirer blurred. For a few minutes in the cold skies above Rechlin, there was no ideology, only flight, the pure language of air and metal that both sides understood. In that moment, innovation ceased to be national. It became human. The Thunderbolt, designed in American factories thousands of miles away, had crossed the lines of war not as a weapon, but as a teacher. It showed its captors the value of resilience, endurance, and simplicity. Lessons that would echo into the jet age and beyond. Decades later, when engineers and historians studied the faded reports and yellowed photographs, they saw something more profound than blueprints or test data. They saw respect, the kind that can only emerge from rivalry. In the end, the captured P-47 was not merely a machine. It was a message that even in war's darkest hours, understanding the enemy can illuminate the shared pursuit that defines us all. The endless human